The television courtroom had witnessed thousands of cases over Judge Judy Scheindlin's 25-year career. Cheating spouses, lying tenants, fraudulent contractors, every variety of human deception had paraded through that room. But in all those years, through all those cases, no one had ever seen Judge Judy cry. Not once. Her steel reputation was built on sharp wit, devastating cross-examination, and an absolute refusal to show weakness. Until the morning James Mitchell walked into her courtroom carrying a folded letter in the pocket of his worn military jacket. James Mitchell stood in the defendant's chair, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the wooden rail. At 67 years old, he looked older, much older. His face was weathered and lined, the kind of deep creases that come from sleeping rough and crying alone. The army jacket he wore was faded, patches barely visible, but the Purple Heart pin on his collar still caught the light. Across from him sat Patricia Brennan, 52, in a designer suit that probably cost more than James had seen in 6 months. She was suing him for $8,500 in unpaid rent, property damage, lease violations, and refusing to vacate her apartment after eviction. Her leather briefcase sat open on the table, stuffed with documentation, photographs of destroyed walls, police reports, witness statements. Everything looked airtight. Everything looked like James Mitchell was just another deadbeat tenant who trashed an apartment and refused to pay. Judge Judy adjusted her glasses and looked at the case file. Patricia Brennan vs. James Mitchell. Unpaid rent totaling $6,200. Property damage estimated at $4,200. Lease violations documented over 11 months. She glanced up at James, who stood perfectly still, staring at his hands. His posture was rigid, military bearings still visible despite the obvious toll life had taken on him. Judge Judy had seen thousands of defendants, and she had developed an almost supernatural ability to spot the truth within seconds. Something about this case felt wrong. Something about the way Patricia sat with perfect confidence while James looked like a man who had already surrendered to defeat. Patricia spoke first, her voice cold and businesslike. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of a tenant who destroyed my property and refuses to take responsibility. Mr. Mitchell moved into my apartment complex in January of last year. For the first few months, everything seemed fine. Then the problems started. Noise complaints from neighbors. Holes punched in the walls. Broken fixtures. I tried to work with him, Your Honor. I really did. But he refused to pay for damages, refused to follow the lease terms, and when I finally had no choice but to file eviction, he refused to leave. I had to get the police involved 3 times. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of photographs. The images showed a small studio apartment in shambles. Fist-sized holes in the drywall, a broken bathroom sink, damaged door frames. Judge Judy examined the photos carefully, then looked at James. "Mr. Mitchell, do you have anything to say about these allegations?" James lifted his head slowly. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his hand moved to his jacket pocket. He pulled out a piece of paper, folded many times, the creases worn soft from being opened and closed repeatedly. The paper was stained, wrinkled, obviously carried everywhere. "Your Honor," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "I have this. It's from my daughter. She wrote it before she died." Judge Judy's expression shifted, just slightly. She reached out and took the letter from his shaking hand. The courtroom went absolutely silent as she unfolded it carefully. Her eyes moved across the first few lines, and something changed in her face. The usual sharp focus softened. She looked up at James, then at Patricia, then back at the letter. She read it again, more slowly this time. The silence stretched out. Bailiff Byrd, who had stood beside Judge Judy for years, noticed the shift and stepped slightly closer. The audience held its breath. Patricia Brennan shifted uncomfortably in her seat, suddenly less confident. Judge Judy set the letter down on her desk, but kept her hand on it, as if anchoring herself. Mrs. Brennan, she said quietly, this letter is from Mr. Mitchell's daughter. Her name was Sarah. She was also a veteran, Army medic, served 2 tours overseas. And according to this letter, she also lived in your apartment complex. She also fell behind on rent. And you evicted her while she was dying of cancer. 2 months before she passed away. The courtroom erupted in gasps. Patricia's face went pale, but she recovered quickly. Your Honor, I don't see how a personal letter is relevant to this case. Judge Judy leaned forward, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of barely controlled fury. Oh, it's relevant, Mrs. Brennan. It's very relevant. Because what this letter describes is a pattern. And I spent last night having my research team look into your business practices. What they found is going to change everything about this case. Before we go any deeper into what Judge Judy discovered about this landlord's treatment of homeless veterans, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button because what gets revealed in this courtroom will make your blood boil. You're watching Justice Served, where we expose those who prey on America's heroes, and this case will absolutely shock you. Patricia Brennan had walked into that courtroom confident she would win another easy judgment against a veteran too broken to fight back. She had no idea that the letter Judge Judy held in her hands was about to expose a conspiracy that had destroyed 23 veteran families and turn her from successful businesswoman into the most hated predator in America. What nobody in that courtroom knew yet was that James Mitchell's daughter had written her final words not as goodbye, but as a weapon. A weapon her father would finally have the courage to use. Judge Judy looked down at the letter again, her fingers tracing the worn creases. The handwriting was shaky, clearly written by someone whose strength was failing. Mrs. Brennan, she said, her voice controlled but tight, before we discuss Mr. Mitchell's supposed property damage, I want to understand something about your business model. You own Patriot Gardens Apartments, correct? Patricia nodded, regaining some of her composure. Yes, Your Honor. 6 buildings, 140 units across the city. I've been in property management for 18 years. And you specifically advertise these apartments as veteran-friendly housing, don't you? Your website says supporting those who served. There are American flags on every building. You market exclusively to military families and veterans. Patricia smiled slightly, as if this was a point in her favor. Yes, Your Honor. I'm very proud of that. My father was a veteran, and I believe in giving back to those who served our country. I offer below-market rent to qualified veteran tenants. Judge Judy's expression didn't change. How noble. Tell me, in the past 3 years, how many veteran tenants have you evicted? Patricia hesitated. The question clearly caught her off guard. I don't keep an exact count, Your Honor. Eviction is always a last resort, but when tenants violate their lease terms or damage property, I have no choice. Try to remember. Judge Judy's voice was sharp now. Roughly how many? Patricia shifted in her seat. Maybe 10 or 12. That's out of 140 units over 3 years. It's actually a very low percentage. Judge Judy opened a folder on her desk. According to public court records, you filed 23 eviction cases against veteran tenants in the past 3 years. 23, Mrs. Brennan. Not 10 or 12. Would you like to revise your answer? The courtroom stirred. Patricia's lawyer leaned over to whisper something to her, but she waved him away. Your Honor, I may have underestimated. I file evictions when legally necessary. That's my right as a property owner. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair. Let's look at the pattern of these evictions. My research team worked very late last night, Mrs. Brennan. They found something interesting. Every single one of your veteran tenants who was evicted had been living in your apartments for between 8 and 11 months. Every single one was charged for property damage that far exceeded their security deposit. And every single one was sent to collections when they couldn't pay the inflated damage claims. Does that sound like coincidence to you? Patricia's face flushed. Your Honor, veterans often struggle with PTSD and other issues that lead to property damage. I'm sympathetic, but I can't absorb thousands of dollars in repairs because someone had a difficult deployment. Judge Judy's eyes narrowed. Sympathetic. That's an interesting word choice. Let's talk about James Mitchell's daughter, Sarah. The courtroom went silent again. Judge Judy picked up the letter. Sarah Mitchell, Army medic, 2 tours overseas, honorably discharged in 2018. She moved into your Patriot Gardens complex in March of 2020. She was undergoing chemotherapy for stage 4 breast cancer. Her medical records show she informed you of her condition when she signed the lease because she needed to ensure the apartment was accessible for her treatments. Patricia said nothing, her jaw tight. In November of 2020, Sarah fell 2 months behind on rent. Not because she was irresponsible, but because her chemotherapy treatments cost $8,000 per session and her insurance had gaps in coverage. She contacted you, explained the situation, offered to catch up on payments once her VA benefits came through. How did you respond? Patricia's voice was defensive. Your Honor, I'm a landlord, not a charity. I have mortgages to pay, maintenance costs, property taxes. I can't let tenants live rent-free because of medical issues. So you evicted her. Judge Judy's voice was flat. You filed eviction paperwork against a dying woman who had served her country. Yes or no? Patricia lifted her chin. I followed the law, Your Honor. I gave proper notice. I filed the correct paperwork. Everything was legal. Legal, Judge Judy repeated. Sarah Mitchell died in January of 2021. 2 months after you evicted her. She died homeless, Mrs. Brennan. She died in a veteran's shelter because you put her on the street while she was dying of cancer. The gasps from the courtroom audience were audible now. Several people shook their heads in disgust. Patricia's lawyer put his hand on her arm, but she pulled away. Your Honor, I didn't know she was going to die that quickly. I'm not a doctor. I'm a property manager doing my job. Judge Judy set the letter down carefully. Let me read you what Sarah wrote to her father. This was written 2 weeks before she died. She read aloud, her voice steady but strained. Dad, I'm sorry I couldn't fight the eviction. The treatments left me too weak. Mrs. Brennan came to the hospital last week. She wanted to know when I would pay the $3,400 she says I owe for damages to the apartment. I told her I was dying. She said that wasn't her problem. Dad, if she ever comes after you, please don't give up. She targets veterans because she thinks we're broken, that we won't fight back. But we survived war. We can survive people like her. Find a way to expose what she's doing. Don't let my eviction mean nothing. The courtroom was completely silent. Judge Judy looked up from the letter, and for the first time in 25 years of television, her eyes were wet. She blinked hard, her jaw clenched. James Mitchell stood with tears running down his face, not bothering to wipe them away. Patricia Brennan had gone pale, her earlier confidence completely shattered. Judge Judy took a slow breath, composing herself. Mrs. Brennan, you came to a cancer ward to collect a debt from a dying woman. Patricia's voice came out as a whisper. That's not how it happened. Then how did it happen? Explain to this court how you justified demanding money from a woman who was dying because she served her country. Patricia had no answer. Judge Judy closed the folder. We're going to take a 15-minute recess. When we return, I'm going to show you exactly what my research team found about your business practices, Mrs. Brennan. And I promise you, by the time we're done here, everyone will understand exactly what kind of person you are. The courtroom reconvened 15 minutes later, but the atmosphere had completely changed. Patricia Brennan sat rigid in her chair, her lawyer whispering urgently in her ear. James Mitchell remained standing, his posture somehow straighter now, as if reading his daughter's words aloud had given him strength he'd forgotten he possessed. Judge Judy returned to the bench carrying a thick folder, her expression unreadable but her eyes sharp and focused. She sat down, opened the folder, and looked directly at Patricia. "Mrs. Brennan, during the recess, I reviewed the complete financial records my team obtained from public filings related to your property management company. The numbers are very interesting." Patricia's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, I object to the use of private financial records without proper discovery." Judge Judy didn't even look at him. "Sit down. These are public tax filings and court documents. Your client chose to sue Mr. Mitchell in my courtroom, which means I get to examine every relevant piece of evidence. Now sit down." Judge Judy turned back to Patricia. "In the past 3 years, your company has collected $427,000 in damage deposits and damage claims from veteran tenants. That's not counting regular rent, just the money you collected for alleged property damage." Patricia shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, property damage is expensive. Repairs add up quickly. I use licensed contractors for all work." Judge Judy flipped through several pages. "Yes, let's talk about your contractors. The primary contractor you use for damage repairs is RB Construction Services. According to these invoices, RB Construction has charged your tenants an average of $4,200 per apartment for damage repairs. That seems extraordinarily high for the kinds of damage you've documented. Holes in walls, broken fixtures, stained carpet. A typical contractor would charge maybe $800 to $1,200 for that level of repair work. Can you explain why your contractor charges 4 times the market rate?" Patricia's face flushed. "I use quality contractors who do thorough work." Judge Judy smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "RB Construction Services is owned by Robert Brennan. That's your brother, isn't it?" The courtroom erupted in whispers. Patricia's lawyer put his head in his hands. Patricia's voice was defensive. "Yes, Robert is my brother, but he's fully licensed and insured. There's nothing illegal about hiring a family member." Judge Judy leaned forward. "Nothing illegal about hiring your brother. But everything illegal about price gouging vulnerable tenants and splitting the profits. Let me explain to this courtroom how your scam works, Mrs. Brennan. You advertise veteran-friendly apartments at below-market rent. Veterans who are struggling, maybe dealing with PTSD or medical issues or just trying to get back on their feet, they see your patriotic branding and think they've found a safe place. They move in, they pay their deposit, they settle into what they think is stable housing. Then after about 6 months, you start documenting violations. Little things at first. Noise complaints, even though the other tenants never actually complained. Minor property issues that you photograph extensively. You build a file. Then around month 8 or 9, you present them with a massive bill for damages, citing your brother's inflated contractor quotes. When they can't pay $4,000 for repairs that should cost $800, you file eviction. You keep their security deposit, you charge them for the phantom damages, you send them to collections, and you destroy their credit. Then you rent the apartment to the next desperate veteran and start the cycle again." Judge Judy paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the courtroom. 23 families in 3 years, Mrs. Brennan. You've collected $427,000 in damage claims, but public records show your brother's company has only been paid $18,000 for actual work performed. Where did the other $409,000 go? Patricia's lawyer stood again. "Your Honor, these are serious accusations without foundation. My client runs a legitimate business." Judge Judy cut him off. "Your client runs a systematic fraud operation targeting disabled veterans." "I'm not finished." She turned back to Patricia. "Let's talk about James Mitchell specifically. He moved into your apartment in January of last year, just 11 months after you evicted his dying daughter. Did you know who he was when you approved his application?" Patricia hesitated. "I process many applications. I don't always remember individual tenants." "You expect this court to believe that you didn't remember evicting a woman who was dying of cancer, and then 11 months later you rented an apartment to her father, who shares the same last name, and listed her as his emergency contact on his application. Patricia said nothing. Judge Judy's voice grew harder. You knew exactly who he was. You targeted him deliberately. A 67-year-old homeless veteran with PTSD and a traumatic brain injury, whose daughter you had evicted while she was dying. You saw him as the perfect victim. Vulnerable, isolated, unlikely to fight back. You probably thought it was your lucky day. James spoke for the first time since the recess, his voice stronger now. She told me when I moved in that she remembered Sarah. She said she felt terrible about what happened and wanted to help me honor her memory by giving me a fresh start. I believed her. I thought she was being kind. Judge Judy looked at James with something close to gentleness. Mr. Mitchell, she wasn't being kind. She was setting a trap. Patricia stood up suddenly, her voice rising. This is outrageous. I'm being accused of crimes I didn't commit based on speculation and conspiracy theories. I run a legal business. If tenants damage property, they pay for it. If they can't pay rent, they get evicted. That's how rental property works. Judge Judy's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. Sit down, Mrs. Brennan. I'm not done with you yet. A man stood up in the back of the courtroom gallery. Your Honor, may I speak? Judge Judy looked at him, surprised. State your name and your connection to this case. Michael Torres, ma'am. I'm a Navy veteran. I was also a tenant of Mrs. Brennan's. Judge Judy gestured to the witness area. Approach, Mr. Torres. Michael walked forward, his limp visible, a cane supporting his left side. He took the witness stand, and when he spoke, his voice was clear and angry. Your Honor, everything you just described, she did to me too. I moved into Patriot Gardens in March of 2022. Within 8 months, she was charging me $3,500 for installing grab bars in my bathroom without permission. I'm disabled. I needed those bars to shower safely. She called them unauthorized construction and demanded I pay her brother to remove them and repair the walls. When I couldn't pay, she evicted me. I was homeless for 8 months because of her. Judge Judy looked at Patricia, whose face had gone from flush to ashen. How many, Mrs. Brennan? How many veterans have you done this to? Patricia's silence was enough. Judge Judy closed the folder in front of her. We're going to take another recess. When we return, I'm issuing my judgment. And Mrs. Brennan, I'm also referring this case to the State Attorney General for criminal investigation. Your predator days are over. When Judge Judy returned to the bench after the second recess, there were 2 additional people in the courtroom. A man and a woman in business attire sat in the front row, both holding legal pads and watching Patricia Brennan with focused intensity. Judge Judy nodded toward them briefly before taking her seat. The courtroom was packed now, word having spread during the recess that something extraordinary was happening. James Mitchell stood in his place, looking exhausted but somehow lighter, as if a weight was beginning to lift. Patricia Brennan looked smaller than she had at the start of the hearing, her expensive suit no longer projecting confidence but instead seeming like costume jewelry on someone pretending to be something they weren't. Judge Judy arranged her papers and looked directly at James. Mr. Mitchell, I've practiced law for over 40 years. I've heard thousands of cases. I've seen every variation of human deception, cruelty, and manipulation. But what I've witnessed here today ranks among the most calculated and heartless schemes I've ever encountered. You are not at fault here. You were targeted by a predator who saw your vulnerability and your grief and decided to exploit both for profit. Her voice was firm but not unkind. Your daughter Sarah wrote that letter to protect you. She documented what happened to her so that you would have evidence if this woman came after you. And she was right to do so. That letter, Mr. Mitchell, has saved not just you, but potentially dozens of other veterans who might have fallen into Mrs. Brennan's trap in the future. Judge Judy turned to Patricia, and her expression hardened immediately. Mrs. Brennan, I find your testimony completely without credibility. The evidence shows a clear pattern of predatory behavior targeting vulnerable veterans over a sustained period. You have weaponized patriotic branding to lure in victims, systematically documented minor issues to justify inflated damage claims, used your brother's contracting company to create fraudulent invoices, and then destroyed these families financially when they couldn't pay your fabricated bills. This isn't landlord-tenant dispute. This is elder abuse, fraud, and criminal conspiracy. Judge Judy paused, letting the words hang in the air. Judgment for the plaintiff, Mr. James Mitchell. You owe the defendant nothing. $0. The rent she claims is void due to fraudulent inducement. The damage claims are rejected as grossly inflated and unsupported by legitimate evidence. Furthermore, Mrs. Brennan owes you the following: $8,500 for fraudulent damage claims made against you. $15,000 in compensatory damages for emotional distress caused by her systematic harassment of a disabled veteran. And $25,000 in punitive damages for her deliberate exploitation of your grief over your daughter's death. Total judgment, $48,500, payable immediately. The courtroom erupted in applause. Bailiff Byrd had to call for order twice before the noise died down. Patricia's lawyer was already whispering urgently to her, but she sat frozen, staring at Judge Judy in disbelief. Judge Judy wasn't finished. Additionally, I am ordering the following. The eviction on Mr. Mitchell's record is hereby vacated and expunged. Mrs. Brennan, you will provide this court with a complete list of every veteran tenant you have evicted in the past 5 years, along with all damage claims filed against them. A court-appointed forensic accountant will audit your business records and your brother's contracting company. Any veteran who was overcharged will receive automatic restitution. Your business license is suspended pending a full investigation by the State Attorney General. Judge Judy gestured to the two people in business attire. Agent Lisa Adam and Agent Robert Martinez from the State Attorney General's office are here to begin that investigation immediately. Mrs. Brennan, you should understand that you may be facing criminal charges including fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy, and potentially racketeering given the systematic nature of your operation. I strongly suggest you cooperate fully with their investigation. Patricia tried to speak, her voice shaking. Your Honor, this is extreme overreach. You can't destroy my business based on speculation. Judge Judy's voice was ice cold. I'm not destroying your business, Mrs. Brennan. You destroyed it yourself the moment you decided that exploiting grieving veterans was an acceptable business model. This hearing is concluded. James Mitchell stood motionless for a moment, as if unable to process what had just happened. Michael Torres, still in the witness area, reached over and gripped his shoulder. Other veterans in the gallery came forward, surrounding James, several of them crying openly. One older man, easily in his 70s, embraced James and whispered something that made them both weep. Patricia Brennan attempted to leave through the side door, but Agent Adams stepped forward. Mrs. Brennan, we need you to come with us to answer some questions. Patricia's lawyer put his hand on her arm. Don't say anything without me present. They left together, Patricia's head down, her earlier arrogance completely shattered. Judge Judy called James forward to the bench. Mr. Mitchell, do you have family or friends who can help you right now? James shook his head. Not really, Your Honor. My daughter was all I had. Sarah's gone. My wife Linda died 4 years ago. It's mostly been just me and my car. Judge Judy's expression softened. Several veterans in the courtroom immediately spoke up. One woman, maybe 50 years old, stepped forward. Your Honor, I run a veterans transition housing program. We have an opening. Mr. Mitchell can stay with us while he gets back on his feet. A man in his 60s added, I work with the VA benefits office. I'll personally expedite his backlogged benefits claim. He should have received those months ago. Judge Judy nodded. Mr. Mitchell, it sounds like you have people who want to help you. Let them. Your daughter fought for her country, and she fought to protect you even while she was dying. Honor that by accepting the help you deserve." James's voice was barely above a whisper. "Thank you, Your Honor. For listening. For believing me." Judge Judy picked up Sarah's letter from her desk and handed it back to him carefully. "Keep this safe, Mr. Mitchell. Your daughter gave you a powerful weapon. She gave you truth. And today, truth won." The courtroom emptied slowly, many people stopping to speak with James, to offer contact information, to share their own stories of Patricia's abuse. The two agents from the Attorney General's office remained, taking statements from Michael Torres and two other veterans who had come forward during the hearing. Patricia Brennan sat in a small conference room off the main courtroom, her lawyer beside her, as Agent Adam laid out the scope of the investigation they were beginning. 23 veteran families, possibly more. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraudulent claims. Years of systematic abuse. The evidence was overwhelming, and it had all unraveled in a single morning because one dying woman had written a letter, and one grieving father had finally found the courage to let someone read it. 3 months after that courtroom hearing, Patricia Brennan stood in a different courthouse facing very different charges. The state attorney general had moved quickly, and the evidence uncovered during the investigation was damning. 23 veteran families became 29 as more victims came forward after seeing news coverage of the Judge Judy case. The forensic audit revealed $623,000 in fraudulent damage claims collected over 5 years, with only $31,000 actually spent on legitimate repairs. Patricia's brother Robert had received $186,000 in payments for contracting work that was either never performed or drastically overpriced. Text messages between the siblings revealed detailed planning of the scheme, including discussions about which veterans would be easiest targets based on their medical records and disability status. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on 18 of 23 counts, including fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy, and theft by deception. The judge sentenced Patricia to 8 years in federal prison with no possibility of early parole. Robert received 5 years. Both were ordered to pay full restitution to every victim, a debt that would follow them for the rest of their lives. James Mitchell sat in the courtroom gallery when the sentence was read, flanked by Michael Torres and 3 other veterans who had testified during the trial. When Patricia was led away in handcuffs, James felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory, only a deep exhaustion and the constant ache of missing his daughter. But Sarah's letter, now laminated and kept in a protective sleeve, rested in his jacket pocket where it had been every day since Judge Judy handed it back to him. That letter had done what Sarah hoped it would. It had protected him, exposed the truth, and prevented countless other veterans from becoming victims. The immediate aftermath of the judgment had been overwhelming. The woman from the Veterans Transition Housing Program, Karen DeLuca, had personally driven James to the facility that same afternoon. A clean room, a real bed, access to counseling and medical care, it was more than he'd had in 3 years. The VA benefits specialist, Tom Rodriguez, had expedited James's backlogged claim within 2 weeks. 18 months of owed benefits, over $34,000, deposited directly into an account the program helped him open. Combined with the $48,500 judgment from Patricia, James suddenly had resources he hadn't imagined possible. But money wasn't what changed James's life. It was the community that formed around him. Michael Torres visited twice a week, and they would sit for hours talking about their service, their struggles, the specific cruelty of being targeted by someone who wrapped herself in the flag they had defended. Other veterans from Patricia's apartments found James through news coverage and social media. They formed a support group, meeting every Thursday evening at the Veterans Center. 17 people at first, then 23, then 30 as word spread. They called themselves Sarah's Warriors, named after the woman whose final act of love had saved so many. James began speaking at VA centers and military transition programs, warning newly discharged service members about predatory landlords and financial scams targeting veterans. His story, and Sarah's letter, became teaching tools. Housing advocacy groups across the country invited him to testify before state legislatures considering tenant protection laws. Within 8 months, 4 states had passed legislation requiring additional oversight of landlords who specifically marketed to veterans or elderly tenants. 6 months after the judgment, James used part of his settlement money to purchase a small mobile home in a veteran-owned community outside the city. It wasn't much, just 600 square feet, but it was his. The first stable housing he'd had since losing everything 3 years earlier. He hung Sarah's military portrait on the wall, right next to her letter in its protective frame. Below them, he placed the purple heart she'd earned and never lived to wear at a ceremony. Every morning, James would stand before that wall and talk to his daughter, telling her about the veterans they'd helped, the policies they'd changed, the lives they'd saved. He liked to think she could hear him. He liked to believe she knew her death hadn't been meaningless after all. The Sarah Mitchell Veteran Housing Protection Fund launched 9 months after the trial. James contributed $20,000 of his settlement, and donations poured in from across the country once the story went national. The fund provided legal representation for veterans facing questionable evictions, conducted free housing inspections, and maintained a public database of landlord complaints specifically targeting military families. Within the first year, the fund helped 43 veterans fight fraudulent evictions, recovering over $280,000 in wrongful charges. Patricia Brennan's 6 apartment buildings were liquidated during bankruptcy proceedings. The properties were purchased by a non-profit housing organization that converted them into legitimate affordable housing for veterans and low-income families. The American flags came down, along with all the patriotic branding that had been used as camouflage for cruelty. The complex was renamed Mitchell House, honoring Sarah's memory and her father's courage. James attended the ribbon-cutting ceremony, standing beside Judge Judy Sheindlin, who had traveled specifically to be there. The photograph of them together, James in his military dress uniform borrowed from the VA for the occasion and Judge Judy with her hand on his shoulder, ran in newspapers across the country. In interviews afterward, Judge Judy spoke about that morning in her courtroom, about reading Sarah's letter and feeling something break inside her professional armor. "In 25 years, I've heard every story," she said. But that letter, written by a dying veteran to her veteran father, warning him about the woman who had destroyed her last days on earth, that was truth in its purest form. And truth demands to be heard. Michael Torres eventually became Director of Housing Services at the Veteran Center, using the Judge Judy case as a model for tenant protection protocols. He carried a laminated copy of Sarah's letter in his briefcase, showing it to every veteran who came in afraid of eviction, proof that fighting back was possible and that justice, however delayed, could still arrive. James Mitchell, now 70 years old, still visits Sarah's grave every Sunday. He brings flowers, usually carnations because those were her favorite, and he reads aloud the letters he receives from veterans the fund has helped. "Your letter saved 43 families this year, baby girl," he'll say, his voice steady now, stronger than it's been in years. 43 families who won't be homeless because you had the courage to write down the truth. The white cane Sarah used during her final months, the one she carried to medical appointments when the chemo made her too weak to see clearly, hangs in James's home now. Not hidden away, but displayed proudly, a reminder that vulnerability is not weakness and that even in dying, his daughter had found a way to protect the people she loved. If you've been moved by Sarah's sacrifice and James's fight for justice, hit that subscribe button right now and let me know in the comments what state you're watching from. Should predators who target veterans face mandatory minimum sentences? Share this video because somewhere out there is another veteran facing a fraudulent eviction, and they need to know that fighting back is possible. You're watching Justice Served, where we honor those who served by demanding they receive the justice they fought to protect. One letter, one truth, one judge who listened, 29 families saved. That's the legacy Sarah Mitchell left behind. That's the power of refusing to stay silent even when dying. And that's why we'll never stop sharing stories like this, because justice isn't just about what happens in a courtroom. It's about what happens after, when broken systems get fixed and vulnerable people find protection and predators finally face consequences. Subscribe now and join the fight for veterans who deserve so much better than they've received.